Jax's revenge domain. I closed my laptop, stood up, and smiled. Not because anything was funny, but because I finally understood how this would end. 20 minutes earlier, I'd been fired in front of 6 executives from Northpoint Capital, the firm buying our company. The new CEO, Ashley Morgan, had leaned back in her chair, hands folded, voice calm and rehearsed. Your role no longer aligns with our future direction. No warning, no transition, just confidence. My name is Justin Parker. I'm 47 years old. And until that morning, I had spent 15 years quietly building Apex Manufacturing Solutions from a small shop into an industrial automation platform valued at $485 million. I didn't build it with PowerPoints or buzzwords. I built it with systems that actually worked. While others talked about digital transformation, I designed the fail-safes that kept production lines running when everything else broke. When supply chains collapsed during the pandemic, my vendor relationships kept parts flowing. When OSHA inspectors showed up unannounced, it was my safety protocols that kept them satisfied and moving on. I was the guy on the factory floor at 3 a.m. when the injection molding line started throwing errors, not posting leadership quotes on LinkedIn from some conference room. Then our founder retired. No handoff, no overlap, just a farewell email on Friday and an empty corner office on Monday. That's when Ashley arrived. 29 years old, founder's niece, Wharton MBA with 0 manufacturing experience, but plenty of opinions about how things should work. On her first day, she gathered everyone in the main conference room and said, "We're going to revolutionize how this company operates." People nodded politely. I didn't. I'd heard this speech before from consultants who disappeared the moment something actually broke. Within a week, the patterns became clear. Department heads stopped going to her first. They came to me instead. Production, maintenance, quality control, even accounting when the new cost tracking system she'd implemented started generating nonsense reports. When Ashley's optimization initiatives created problems, I fixed them quietly. When her consultant-driven changes broke established workflows that had taken years to perfect, I documented the failures and restored functionality. I kept copies of everything. Email chains, incident reports, downtime logs. Not because I planned anything, because that's what you do when you've spent 15 years keeping a place running. Ashley noticed people coming to me, but she misread what it meant. Instead of asking why, she decided it was a problem to solve. Justin's very hands-on, she'd tell visitors, making it sound like a limitation. Great at execution, but we need more strategic thinking for the next phase. Strategic thinking. Code for MBA theories that sounded impressive in boardrooms but fell apart when they hit actual manufacturing reality. The real test came when she decided to streamline our vendor approval process. The old system required 3 sign-offs for any new supplier. Time-consuming, she said. Bureaucratic. She cut it down to 1. Within 2 weeks, procurement had approved a new hydraulics supplier based purely on cost savings. Great prices, she announced in the weekly meeting. 20% under our current vendor. I knew that supplier. They'd been blacklisted 3 years earlier after delivering components that were technically within spec but failed under sustained load. The kind of failure that doesn't show up in initial testing but shuts down an entire production line when it happens during a critical run. I mentioned this in an email. Ashley's assistant replied that we needed to be open to new partnerships and not limited by past experiences. The failures started 6 days later. First one hydraulic cylinder, then another. The injection molding line that produced our highest margin components went down for 14 hours, while we emergency sourced replacements from our original supplier. Cost us $180,000 in missed deliveries and overtime. Ashley called it a learning opportunity and blamed inadequate quality control processes. That's when Northpoint Capital began their due diligence. They weren't just looking at numbers, they were looking at operational stability, the kind of thing you can't fake with spreadsheets and presentations. Their questions were specific. What happens if this supplier fails? Who holds emergency shutdown authority? Where are the backup protocols documented? Who actually knows how these systems work when something breaks at 2 a.m.? Ashley answered with confidence and consulting frameworks. Process optimization, digital integration, scalable methodologies. I answered with facts, technical specifications, historical data, the names and phone numbers of people who'd answer their calls when things went wrong. The Northpoint team started asking for more details. Not in the official meetings, but in casual conversations after Ashley had moved on to her next presentation. Quick questions about supplier relationships, maintenance schedules, who'd trained the current operators. I gave them straight answers. Clean, factual, no editorializing. Just the information they needed to understand how things actually worked versus how they appeared in org charts. Because when you've been around manufacturing long enough, you learn something important. Industrial disasters don't start with explosions. They start with people who think good intentions can substitute for understanding systems. They start with confidence that isn't backed by competence. Ashley didn't see any of this coming. She was too busy planning the next optimization initiative, the next process improvement that would prove she belonged in that corner office. But I could see exactly how this would end, because I'd been carefully documenting everything, and now Northpoint was asking the right questions. After that meeting where I got fired, nothing changed on the surface. My badge still worked, my office still existed, people still nodded when they passed my desk, but something shifted underneath. Something you only notice if you've spent years understanding the real flow of information in a place. I stopped being invited to things. Ashley didn't announce it, didn't need to. Strategic planning sessions quietly became leadership only. Vendor calls moved to impromptu chats I somehow never heard about until after decisions were made. When someone asked where I was, she'd smile and say, "Justin's more about execution than vision. We need strategic thinking for the next phase." I took that as permission. There's a difference between being ignored and being underestimated. One is dangerous for you. The other can be useful if you know what to do with it. So I stayed quiet and kept doing my job. I fixed what I was still authorized to fix. I documented everything else, every dependency, every override, every process that only worked because someone knew where the actual controls were hidden. Not the controls shown on org charts or process documents, but the real switches that kept things running when theory met reality. The maintenance scheduling system Ashley had replaced was a perfect example. Her new lean optimization model looked elegant in PowerPoint. Clean flowcharts, automated triggers, data-driven decisions. The consultant who designed it had probably never worked a factory floor in his life, but he understood algorithms. What he didn't understand was why our old system had seemingly random exceptions built in. Why certain equipment got maintained 2 weeks early even when diagnostics showed green. Why some suppliers got priority treatment that didn't match their contract terms. Why backup protocols existed for scenarios that hadn't happened in years. Those exceptions were institutional knowledge. Learned responses to problems that had cost us money before. The injection molding line that looked fine but developed stress fractures if pushed too hard. The hydraulics supplier with quality issues during busy seasons. Ashley's system optimized all that away. Eliminated redundancy and human judgment. Equipment started failing more often. Not catastrophically, just frequently enough to create constant small crises. The kind that looked like normal variance in reports but drove floor supervisors crazy. I documented everything. Email chains where I'd flagged issues. Maintenance logs showing predicted versus actual failure rates. Incident reports with timestamps for emergency repairs. Not because I was building a case, because that's what you do when systems aren't working. Meanwhile, Northpoint Capital's due diligence team was asking increasingly specific questions, not just about financial performance or market position, but about operational continuity. The kind of questions that come from people who've seen acquisitions fail because nobody understood how the target company actually worked. At first, the contact came indirectly. A junior analyst would accidentally copy me on emails asking for technical clarification. A risk assessor would request historical data just to be thorough. I replied once, clean and factual, no editorial commentary, just the information they'd requested. Then Rachel Barnes, Northpoint's integration lead, emailed me directly. "Justin, could you spare 15 minutes to clarify some operational dependencies? Nothing formal, just want to make sure we understand the technical infrastructure." I stared at that email longer than I should have. In acquisitions, people don't ask that question unless they already suspect someone else is holding the real map. Unless the official presentations aren't matching what they're seeing in the data. I agreed. One call, 15 minutes. Rachel didn't waste time. She asked about single points of failure, undocumented safeguards, and who actually had emergency authority when things went wrong. Not theoretical authority based on org charts, but practical authority based on who people called when systems broke at 2 a.m. I told her exactly where the risks were and where the protections lived. The vendor relationships that couldn't be easily replaced. The maintenance protocols that looked redundant but prevented expensive failures. The informal networks of knowledge and trust that kept everything functioning smoothly. Almost casually, I mentioned that several of those protections were person-dependent. She paused. Dependent on who? Historically, I said, on me. That was all it took. One honest answer to a direct question. After that call, things accelerated quietly. My name started appearing in footnotes of internal documents I wasn't supposed to see. Draft org charts included my input before I'd officially given it. Legal started asking whether certain changes required operational review, a phrase that hadn't existed in our vocabulary a week earlier. Ashley didn't notice the shift. She was busy announcing improvements and preparing presentations for Northpoint's team. She'd replaced our procurement workflow with a vendor optimization matrix that created bottlenecks. Payments took longer. Suppliers got frustrated. 2 vendors started asking for payment guarantees. I solved most of these problems with phone calls. Quick conversations with people I'd worked with for years, explaining the temporary nature of the changes, asking for patience while we worked through the transition period. But I logged every incident and forwarded detailed documentation to a new email address, Northpoint's risk assessment mailbox. No commentary, no accusations, just facts. Timeline data showing how new processes performed compared to old established ones. Cost analyses demonstrating the hidden expenses of optimization. Incident reports documenting problems that hadn't existed before the changes were implemented. The strangest part wasn't Ashley's confidence in her improvements. It was her certainty that leadership meant having the final word in every decision, that systems ran on good intentions and enthusiasm could substitute for understanding. But manufacturing systems don't care about enthusiasm. They operate according to physics and economics. They either work or they don't. And when they don't work, production stops and money gets lost. Northpoint wasn't watching Ashley's presentations anymore. They were watching operational reality. They were asking questions about sustainability and what would happen if key experienced people left during the transition. Questions that had very specific, detailed technical answers that Ashley simply wasn't adequately prepared to give them. The first document arrived late on a Wednesday night. No subject line, no greeting, just an attachment labeled Transition Internal Draft.doc. I almost ignored it. Almost. 15 years of habit made me open it anyway. It wasn't meant for me. That was obvious from the tracked changes and half-written notes still blinking in. Yellow highlight. This was a working document, the kind that exists before decisions become official, before someone commits to a position they'll have to defend in meetings. I scrolled through org charts and transition timelines. There it was, buried in a section titled Operational Continuity Authority. Beneath it, Continuity Lead, TBD. I leaned back and let that sink in. When something is marked to be determined in an acquisition document, it doesn't mean undecided. It means someone important is still thinking. And in acquisitions, thinking time is power. I saved the file to my personal drive and named it Notes. Not insurance, not leverage, not evidence, just notes. I wasn't ready to admit what it might become, but I wasn't naive enough to pretend it didn't matter either. The next few days were quiet on the surface, chaotic underneath. Ashley pushed through another optimization initiative, this time reassigning approval authority for safety protocols. She didn't consult the safety manager. She didn't inform the union representative. And she certainly didn't notify Northpoint about the change. The system locked itself within hours. Safety reports failed validation because the new approval chain didn't match regulatory requirements. A routine OSHA inspection got flagged as non-compliant. Then OSHA sent a message that was polite, formal, and unmistakably serious about the procedural changes. Ashley blamed legacy system rigidity and promised a fix by Friday. Northpoint noticed. They noticed everything. Rachel called me again. This time she didn't ask for 15 minutes. She asked for my professional assessment of the situation. Not my opinion, my detailed assessment based on 15 years of operational experience. I didn't editorialize. I didn't assign blame or make accusations. I methodically walked her through the dependencies Ashley didn't know existed, and the critical authority chains she'd unknowingly broken. I forwarded logs, screenshots, and detailed timestamps showing exactly when things had stopped working and why. At the end, Rachel was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You realize this isn't sustainable long term." "I do," I replied. "That's why I've been carefully documenting everything." After that call, the tone shifted subtly but unmistakably. I wasn't being asked what was happening anymore. I was being asked what should happen next. My name started appearing in draft documents I wasn't supposed to see. Risk assessments referenced Parker's analysis as if my input was already assumed to be part of the decision-making process. Legal started asking whether certain actions required operational approval, a phrase that hadn't existed in our company vocabulary a week earlier but was suddenly showing up in multiple contexts. That phrase again. Operational approval, as if someone had decided that operations needed a specific kind of oversight that went beyond normal management hierarchy. Ashley, meanwhile, was celebrating what she called a successful transformation sprint. She brought in another former classmate to advise on strategic velocity and operational efficiency. The recommendation was to eliminate what they called redundant supplier relationships. Specifically, they wanted to cut the backup vendor relationships I'd carefully maintained after learning some expensive lessons over the years. I flagged the risk in a detailed email, explained the history, the reasoning, and the potential consequences of losing those backup relationships. Ashley's assistant replied that we needed to be more agile and not constrained by past thinking. They eliminated our backup supplier for hydraulic components on Tuesday. Thursday, our primary supplier had equipment failure that shut down their production for 3 days. Without the backup, we had no alternative source. We scrambled for emergency suppliers, paid premium prices, and still lost 2 days of production on our highest margin line. I sent incident report and email chain showing the ignored warnings. Late Friday afternoon, another file landed in my inbox. Same label as before, same format, updated draft. This time, the placeholder was gone completely. Continuity lead. Justin Parker. No announcement, no congratulations, no fanfare, just my name typed cleanly like it had always belonged there. Like someone had made a decision and moved on to other business. I closed my laptop and sat in the empty factory office for a long moment. Through the windows, I could see the injection molding line running smoothly. Systems that worked because people understood them. Once your name appears in documents like that, there's no going back. You're no longer observing the shift. You become the shift. I didn't tell anyone about the document, not the production manager, not the safety director, not even the 2 veteran supervisors who still checked with me privately when Ashley's latest improvements created problems they couldn't solve through the official channels she'd established. Authority like that doesn't need announcement. In fact, it works much better without one. Real authority is demonstrated through consistent actions and proven results, not proclamations. Ashley sensed something fundamental had changed but couldn't identify exactly what. Meetings stopped starting on time. Strategic decisions stalled halfway through implementation because someone would ask whether proper operational approval had been obtained. People started asking, "Has this been cleared?" instead of, "What does Ashley want?" The simple question revealed how gravity was shifting throughout the entire organization. The shift wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, persistent, methodical, like water finding the most efficient path downhill. Authority was flowing toward proven competence, toward understanding how things actually worked rather than how they looked on paper or in presentations. Ashley could feel it happening but couldn't stop it because she didn't understand the underlying operational mechanisms at work. She kept trying to reassert control through announcements and policy changes, but each attempt made the operational problems more visible to everyone watching. The real final test was definitely coming very soon now, and everyone would be watching carefully. The real test came the following Monday. Ashley called an emergency leadership meeting. I wasn't invited. What was new was the email that arrived 12 minutes after the meeting ended, sent from Northpoint's legal counsel. "Justin, we understand a staffing change was proposed this morning. Can you confirm whether operational approval has been granted?" I read the message twice. No one had used that phrase in front of Ashley yet. I replied with one sentence: "No operational approval has been issued." Within the hour, the proposed change was reversed. Ashley sent a brief message blaming misalignment in the approval process. She started watching me differently after that. One afternoon, she leaned against my doorframe. Northpoint seems to trust your input. They ask questions. I answer them, I replied. She smiled without warmth. Just make sure we're aligned. The next escalation was bigger. Ashley decided to streamline leadership ahead of closing. She drafted a transition plan that removed 3 senior managers. She framed it as modernization. The plan reached Northpoint before it reached me. Rachel called within minutes. Did you approve this? No, I said, and it violates the continuity framework. Can you send the documentation? I already had it prepared. By end of business, Northpoint froze all staffing changes. Ashley stormed into my office. You're undermining me. I looked up calmly. I'm doing my job. You don't get to block executive decisions. I didn't correct her. The contract would do that soon enough. That night, another message arrived from Northpoint. Final transition meeting scheduled for Monday morning. Please, bring business cards. I stared at the screen longer than necessary. People don't ask for cards unless they're about to change how the room understands you. The morning of the final meeting arrived quietly. I arrived early. Ashley was already there. New suit, sharper haircut. The kind of confidence that comes from believing you're about to win something important. She barely acknowledged me as I took a seat near the far end of the table. Northpoint's team filed in. Legal, finance, then Rachel. Finally, Shane Murphy, Northpoint's CEO, took the head seat. Ashley straightened. This was her moment, or so she thought. Shane opened without ceremony. Let's review transition readiness and leadership alignment. Ashley jumped in immediately. She spoke about vision, velocity, and cultural transformation. She clicked through slides filled with arrows and future state diagrams. Somewhere in the middle, my name appeared once, small, under a section titled Outgoing Operational Support. I didn't react to seeing my name there. Then came the staffing slide. To ensure organizational agility post-close, Ashley said, clearing her throat, we'll be making several key leadership adjustments. She glanced at me just long enough to make her intentions clear. Shane didn't interrupt. He didn't nod either. He simply waited. When Ashley finished, the room went quiet. Shane turned not to Ashley, but to Rachel. Continuity review. Rachel opened her folder. Several of these changes require approval under the operational framework. Ashley frowned. We've discussed this. I'm the acting CEO. Shane looked at her evenly. You're the acting CEO of a company in transition. Then he turned to me. Justin, can you clarify whether these changes were approved? Every eye in the room shifted. I could have spoken, explained, cited frameworks, walked them through the logic step by step. Instead, I reached into my jacket pocket. The business card was simple, clean, my name, my role, and Northpoint Capital beneath it. I placed it on the table and slid it forward across the polished surface. The sound, paper against glass, was barely audible. The effect certainly wasn't. Ashley laughed, sharp, dismissive, disbelieving. That's not funny. Shane picked up the card carefully. He didn't laugh. He read it once, then again. The expression that crossed his weathered face wasn't directed at me. It was directed at something finally clicking into place. Rachel exhaled softly. Legal flipped to a page already marked with yellow tabs. Ashley's laughter died mid-breath. This hasn't been. Shane raised a hand. Calm, final, authoritative. We'll address that in a moment. The room felt heavier now, the air thicker. For the first time since she'd taken the job, Ashley looked genuinely uncertain. Shane didn't rush. He let the silence stretch just long enough for discomfort to settle in, then nodded to Northpoint's general counsel. She opened the folder and turned it so the table could see. Page 14, paragraph E. Ashley leaned forward. This is unnecessary. Whatever confusion there is, we can clear it up offline. It's being cleared up now, Shane replied. The lawyer began to read. Not quickly, not dramatically, just clearly and methodically. All transition phase operational and staffing decisions shall fall under final authority of the designated continuity lead. Such approval may not be overridden by interim executives unless ratified by the acquiring board. She paused deliberately. Designated continuity lead, Justin Parker. The words landed without noise, but they hit like dead weight. Ashley stared at the page. That's not possible, she said. I never agreed to that. Shane folded his hands. You signed the agreement. I didn't read it like that, Ashley snapped. Legal said it was standard. It is standard, the lawyer said calmly, when the buyer identifies operational risk tied to leadership volatility. Ashley's jaw tightened. So what? He outranks me now? For transition operations, Shane answered. Yes. No one spoke. Contracts don't care about hierarchy. They care about signatures. And to be clear, Shane continued, any staffing changes proposed without operational approval are void. The meeting ended without ceremony. Ashley stayed seated. I gathered my notes and stood. Justin, she said quietly. I turned. You planned this? No, I said. I prepared for it. There's a difference. And in that difference, her executive trajectory had quietly ended. 6 months later, no one talked about the meeting anymore. Apex didn't survive through clever maneuvering. It survived because the right systems were in place, and the right people were trusted to run them effectively.